to some of you who are on the other side of the globe. I welcome all of you to the 21st lecture of the Foundation Day lecture series. As you all know, like CIL celebrated its 53rd Foundation Day on July 17, and we are having a series of lectures since then. We started with Nicholas Evans, and we have another Australian today with us, like Coupe, Alexander Robertson Coupe. I don't think many of them know your middle name. So it's indeed a great pleasure to welcome Professor Alexander Coupe. Dr. Coupe, of course, is not a new face to CIL. On this occasion, I also welcome all our great colleagues, Professor David Bradley, Professor Rajesh Deva. We have our director, CIL director, Shalendra Mohan with us. And also my other colleagues are there, many of them, Professor Subbarao and many others. Good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to formally welcome my dear friend Aoic, as he's known by everyone. Alexander Robertson Coupe. He is an associate professor at the Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. He has sent us a CV of 19 pages. It will take more than an hour to read out most of his accomplishments to this august audience. Nevertheless, I would like to introduce him properly to some of the young colleagues here who are waiting to know about Professor Coupe. Aoic got his PhD from La Trobe University, and it is indeed a great pleasure that his supervisor is with us today, David Bradley. The thesis was on the monks and dialect of Aoic. He is indeed a master of our languages. He has worked on several languages of Nagaland, but definitely a master of monks, not only on monks and Aoic, also Chungliao. He also worked for his MA on Aoic back in 2003. His research interests are on different language families. Sino-Tibetan, he has worked quite a bit. Besides Aoic, he has also worked on done personally field work on Angami, Chang, Kiamningwan, Lotha, Sanctum, Yemkuang, and Zeme. He also turned his attention to Indo-Aryan, that too, the variety spoken in the Northeast, Hindi, the half-lang Assam variety, Nagamese, Nepali, the Nagaland variety, and also Assamese. He also worked on Thai-Kadai languages like Central Thai, Southern Thai, and Shan. His research topics are very much varied and very interesting. He focuses on language documentation and description, anthropological linguistics, linguistic typology, language contact, nominalization, syntax of complex sentences, Tibeto-Burman historical linguistics, grammaticalization, tone systems, phonetics, of course, both articulatory and acoustics, language maintenance, orthography development, and lexicography of minority languages. He had several research grants. He has been awarded with research grants right from 2004 onwards by various institutions, some from the Government of Australia and a few from Singapore, the Ministry of Education. We have quite a bit. And also he has been a PI and co-PI in several important projects. His publications are many. The most important ones are the Grammar of Monks and Aoic, which has been widely studied and used by many in Tibeto-Burman circles, especially those who are studying the typology of Tibeto-Burman languages. Grammar of Monks and Aoic, published by Mutan. And we also have another important work of his, published by Pacific Linguistics, Canberra. That's a phonetic and phonological description of Aoic. He has several contributions, more than, like there are 8 contributions to edited volumes, refereed journals. He has 10 articles and conference proceedings, several articles. And most important to some of the people here is some of his works are available as archives. If you are interested, we will share his CV also, probably over email, or you can download. There are archives of Northern Sanctum and also on monks and all. We have several archives, and he also has been a visiting professor and fellowship in several countries. Europe, of course, with the Humboldt Fellowship. He was a Humboldt Fellow for several months in Germany. He has been invited by Tokyo University of Foreign Studies for a linguistic dynamic science project. He has been a frequent visiting fellow of his own country, Australia at ANU, and several times in other places like Lathrop. And most, we are very proud. I'm very happy to share the news that he was a visiting lecturer at Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, where I worked for 8 years, and Rajesh Asdeva, who is with us here, also worked there. And I think it was he spent one full semester teaching phonetics there in 1999. So he's a good friend of the Northeast in many ways. He has given his services not only in research but also in teaching to India, especially to the Northeast. We are so thankful to you for that. On behalf of Nehu, I would like to thank you for that, because we are very proud to have such an eminent person who spent one full semester with us. He has taught several courses. I'm not going to read them all. He has given more than 100 lectures in many places. Papers also presented, all keynote addresses and invited papers also several, more than a dozen. I just don't want to take time to read out all these things, but we are having with us an eminent scholar, and also he was the editor of the very famous journal Linguistics of the Tibeto-Burman Area for 3 terms, from 2007 to 8, and then again 12 to 15 and 15 to 17. And he's also a member of the editorial board of Himalayan Linguistics and LTBA. He has several other credentials, and it's a long list. I am very happy once again to invite Professor Alexander Robertson Coupe to the CIL on behalf of my own institute and on my personal behalf. We are very proud to have you here as the 21st speaker in this Foundation Day lecture series. With these few words, I now request Alec to start his presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Umarani. Thank you for that generous introduction and for the invitation to share some of my research with you. I'm very happy to be here. It's nice to see some old faces. Hopefully we'll get to meet in person in the future if our world improves. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and I trust you can see the slides. Can you please?
Yes, we can see the slides.
Thank you. Good. So I'll just mention that this is Tikio village taken from the guest house at Shamato. It's a particularly beautiful part of the world, and the range behind is the range that it separates India from Myanmar, and it's a wonderful place. It's full of so many languages, this area, and I've been very happy working here for a long time. I'm grateful to my supervisor, David Bradley, for giving me the background I needed in order to work on these languages. And I'm honored by his presence today. What we'll look at today is firstly the location of the Aoic languages and this problem of their branch affiliation, which remains a mystery. Then we'll look at the phonological features of Aoic in overview before we take a tour of the noteworthy characteristics, looking at Mongsen and Chungli Ao dialects, and then Northern Sanctum. This will take up most of my talk, a little bit more on Yimkyung and Lota languages that I'm not quite as familiar with. I'll briefly talk about sesquisyllabic word formation, and then a little bit on language contact in Nagaland and the amazing amount of linguistic diversity that you find in this region and some reasons for it. So firstly, here's a map of Northeast India, and this range through here. This is the Indo-Burmese arc, where a lot of the languages a lot of the linguistic diversity of Northeast India can be found. And in particular, I'll be talking about the languages spoken here in Northeast India. And here's a slightly more detailed map showing the distribution of the Konyak or Sal branch languages in pink here, the Ao languages through, and well, Aoic through central Nagaland. We've got these Angami Pochuri languages in brown, the Tankulik in sort of a violet color, I suppose it is, and then the Zemi and Zeliangrong Liang Mai as well down in the blue here in the southeast. So firstly, genetic affiliation. Well, we know that there's a good link, I think now, between the Ao dialects and sanctum. I'll show you the evidence that I can find. This is in the form of innovative overcounting system, which is now obsolete, but still in the minds of the elderly speakers. And there's another overcounting system that is recorded in Lota and Yimkyung as well. Well, recorded by Witter in Lota, and Yimkyung also found a similar system by working with consultants a few years ago. We don't really know what the higher level is of Aoic to Tibeto-Burman and ultimately to Sino-Tibetan. We just haven't got that far with this. We don't have any conclusive evidence linking Aoic to Angami Pochuri languages of southern Nagaland, even less evidence of a link to Zemaic, spoken in southwest Nagaland, there's a typo there, and adjacent regions of Manipur and Assam. If there are commonalities between these languages, it could well be due to language contact or perhaps serial characteristics, not direct genetic inheritance. And that, of course, creates problems for us because we're not sure which is due to contact and which is due to inheritance. This is Rob Burling's 2003 classification. You can see that he's got a question mark above all of these languages. I think probably sanctum needs to be joined onto the Ao dialects here because of the evidence I'll show you on the next slide. And we just need to do more work on a lot of these languages. I think if we've got more descriptions, then we'll start to pick up on things that hadn't been obvious to us by just making lexical comparisons. This is this obsolescent overcounting system in Aoic, and I've got data from Mill's anthropological monograph published in 1926. When the overcounting system was healthy, it's decimal from 1 to 15. But when you get to 16, you anticipate the 20, and you say then negative complete, the verb for complete, and then you add the org on. So 16 is mki mapen turok. So 20 not complete the 6, and so on for up to 19. And then when we get to 20, then it becomes decimal. So it would be 20 and 1, 20 and 2, 20 and 3, 20 and 4, 20 and 5. And then you'd say 30, Simra Mapan Turok. And that would be the 30 not complete, the 6th step towards 30. So it's a very unusual overcounting system, this one. And it's incredibly rare. You don't find this in many languages of the world. And to find it in the same dialects looks like it's an inherited feature. Now, when I worked on Northern Sanctum a while ago, my 65-year-old speaker told me he could remember a system like that being used as well. And here it is here, Makya Mapi Tarok. It's the same system. So 20 not complete the 6, and so on. And again, it alternates between overcounting and decimal, switching at 5 in each higher decade. It looks like it's innovative, and it looks like it's inherited from Proto-Aoic. So I think it's the strongest evidence we've got so far of a link between Northern Sanctum and the Aoic varieties. Of course, it's all gone now. The reason why it changed is because the missionaries couldn't teach kids arithmetic. So when they converted them to Christianity and started to educate them, they got rid of the overcounting system and they replaced it with a more regular decimal system. But fortunately, some missionaries and also uh, um, administrative officers who were working in Northeast India, like Mills and Hutton and others, they documented the overcounting, and so we've got this valuable record. Daniel Brun in 2014 finished his thesis looking at reconstruction of what he calls Proto-Central Naga. I avoid using Naga because it's a political label. It's not a linguistic label, and I think it's confusing to people outside of our field. So I avoid using it as a linguistic classificatory label. But anyway, he does, and he finds that there are 4 salient rhyme coda innovations in this group that I call Aoic. But unfortunately, there's only 2 Tibeto-Burman languages with more no with 2 or well under 2 of these innovations. So it's not possible to say how this work would link Aoic to a higher level branch. And this is why I think we need to go beyond just lexical comparisons and maybe even phonological reconstructions. We need to look at things like the overcounting system that I showed you earlier and morphology. So I'll just give you a brief overview of Aoic before we start looking at individual features in separate languages. There's 5 to 7 distinct places of articulation, including a laryngeal place. Most have got 6 manners of articulation. There's a 2-way voice onset time contrast for all of them, except in Chung Liao, it's collapsed, and I'll show you the extent of that as well. It contrasts voiceless unaspirated and voiceless aspirated plosives, and in some cases affricates as well. It's got usually there's a simple triangular vowel system of 4 to 6 vowels. Most have got contrastive tones, 3. Yim Kyung is a bit different. It's got 2 contrastive tones. Confusingly for us, it also uses a lot of intonation to mark non-final clauses and phrases, and I'll show you and play you an example of that, which complicates the analysis of tone because we need to make sure that we're actually working on the underlying tones and not on the intonation, which is overlaid on top of the individual syllabic tones. So it makes working on these languages quite challenging. There's a ubiquitous sesquisyllabic structure. Even in Lotte, sometimes the initial consonant has gone and we've just got a vowel. I'll show you examples of this a little bit later. Voiceless sonorants are quite rare overall in the languages of the world. I think on the WALS webpage, there's 305 languages that have investigated for nasals, and only 12 of those have voiceless nasals. But in addition to voiceless nasals, you'll find a whole lot of other voiceless sonorants as well, and we'll see examples of those. The more I look in these languages, the more interesting things I find. So there's a lot of phonological rarities that make these languages of great value to phonological typology because it extends the diversity that we find in languages. So there's a good reason for working on them. This is just a photo of Chunky Village, typical kind of a village. They're mostly built on the tops of ridges for defenses, for defensive reasons in the past. But now, of course, they don't have to worry about defense. What's happened is that those mountaintop villages, well, in some ways, they limit development because it makes it harder to get to them and for them to get their produce out to markets and things like that. So what protected them in the past now creates problems. First, I'm going to be talking about the two major dialects of this Mokokchung district. Ao is the group that's spoken here. This is from Mills 1926, and we've got these ranges that run in a more or less, well, sort of a north-south direction, I suppose, through the Naga Hills, what were called the Naga Hills in the past. We've got mostly Zhongli spoken down here with the dashes underneath, down this range, this Lampangkong range on the west side of the Diku River here. Then we've got down here in the south, this is a range that the locals call the Ongpangkong, and that's got quite a few Mongsen varieties. We've got a mix of villages that speak either just Mongsen or just Zhongli over here on the Chunky Kong. And we've got another range that runs across here. And this one has got a mix of villages, some which have got one ward of the village speaking Mongsen and the other ward speaking Zhongli. And that's very, very interesting. A lot of these villages have got, for example, Kansa village, which is spoken just here. That's got a Zhongli Kel. They call it Zhongli Kel and a Mongsen Kel, but everyone speaks Mongsen nowadays. So I assume that there must have been Zhongli speakers there at one stage, and I'll be discussing language contact in diversity towards the end. I'll just point out a few other villages. This one over here, that's Ao, but it's, well, Zhongli, but it's been heavily influenced by Pom. And you've got Chung villages here, which used to be Ao speaking as well, but now they're Chung speaking. And Longso has been heavily influenced by other languages in this area. So quite a lot of linguistic diversity, even amongst the Ao languages, because of language contact with other linguistic communities. So this is Warramong village, where I did my MA research. And this is Mamutung, where I did my PhD research. And I'll be speaking a little bit of these two varieties. They're quite different. Firstly, here's the Mongsen Ao phonemes. As you can see, there's voiceless and voiceless unaspirated, voiceless unaspirated contrast in the plosives. We've got quite a lot of voiceless sonorants, which is somewhat unusual. Some of these languages don't have the voiceless sonorants. They've merged with the voice sonorants, like in Warramong village. Mangwatung has still got them separate. Some languages have innovated, like Warramong has innovated an additional vowel, and otherwise it's a pretty straightforward vowel system. Interestingly, some varieties of Mongsen have got a creaky voice vowel, which is only phonemic, in contrast with the low central R. And as I mentioned before, Mongsen's got 3 tones. And Zhongli, you can see, has undergone quite a lot of merger of its sounds. It doesn't have anywhere near as many vowel phonemes. It doesn't have the creaky voice vowel phoneme either. It doesn't have any of the voiceless sonorants. These are all merged with the voiced varieties. It's lost its contrast between unaspirated and aspirated stops as well. And the dental affricates here, they appear to have merged with the palatoalveolar affricate. 3 tones again in Zhongli. In Mongsen, the midtone is probably the most common one, but in Zhongli, Temsa Ningsang, my colleague and collaborator, tells me that the high tone is more common. This is just showing the distribution of the consonants in syllables and word structure. And the glottal stop is quite interesting because it gets deleted in front of a syllable boundary. So if you, say, have got a synthetic verb stem and you add on, say you've got a root with a glottal stop at the end of it, and you add on a suffix, then the glottal stop disappears. So it's sort of like a prosodic phoneme in many respects. It's not like your other consonant phonemes of the language, because they don't disappear when you add suffixes onto a verb stem. It's pretty straightforward. We don't have any consonant clusters as onsets. We've got typical for this region and Southeast Asia generally. We've got fairly limited coders as well, limited to the unaspirated plosives and the three nasals, the voice nasals. The rhotic is very rare. It doesn't occur very frequently in lexical items. It's very, very common, though, as a grammatical morpheme. So that's quite interesting. Then this is looking at Warramong Mongsen vowel formants, and the high back rounded and mid-close rounded U and O are losing their contrast, and these are now occurring in free variation. The only place where this doesn't occur is in Longla village, Longla that should be, there's a typo, apologies for that, which is spoken on the east side of the Diku River, where it's in contact with a lot of other languages, and that's got a somewhat different vowel system. So there's just one vowel phoneme for high back rounded, and that's got quite a decent range. So sometimes it comes out as O, sometimes as U. And interestingly, Northern Sanctum appears to be losing the phonemic contrast between U and O as well. So that's something that these languages have got in common. This is based on my 2003 work. This is open monosyllables, one male speaker. You can see that there's not a great deal of difference in fundamental frequency between the high and the mid for this speaker. And but even though there's not much difference, when I did a perception test, the speaker was able to score quite highly. He got about 89% accuracy for the words that I tested. So there's not a great deal of difference. There's they're fairly flat as well. They sound very level. So the fundamental frequency at the beginning of the rhyme is the main cue for hearing a pitch difference. Again, this is what makes the language challenging. If you've got contours, then the contour helps you to hear the tones. But these are very flat generally and level, these tones in these Aoic languages. However, that being the case, you've also got this incredible intonation. So if you look down here at the pitch traces, you can see that these arrows in the transcription represent this rising intonation that the speaker is using at the end of the noun phrase or at the end of the clause, if it's a non-final clause. And it sounds like this.
이 인전절 마마동령을 이 텔링 임tilluin.
I hope everyone heard that okay. It's always a struggle to get the technology to work. So when we're working on tonal languages in Northeast India, we have to be aware that speakers will use intonation a lot, and they'll trump the individual tones of their syllables. So we've got to be very careful when we record the data. We need to be very well controlled. I recommend using a carrier sentence, and if your speaker is still putting their list intonation on the words in the carrier sentence, then you need to play back the recording and train them so that they're made aware of their own intonation. Otherwise, you'll be measuring the fundamental frequency of the intonation, not of the tone. And I discuss this technique in my 2014 paper, which I reference at the end of the slides. Now, some interesting things go on with tone. And one day when I was working with a native speaker, I played back a bit of text, and it was actually ni-na, but when he repeated the sentence to me, he said ni with a low rising tone. So then he explained to me that you can leave out the segmental material of this agentive case marker, and the mid-tone that's associated with the agentive case marker then becomes free, and it docks onto the syllable of the preceding word, and the end result is a low rising tone. This is the only case I have of this kind of thing resulting in well, two, a low and a mid-tone becoming a rising tone. It's under certain circumstances that this occurs, and it seems to be limited to that Ong Bang Gong area that I showed on the map a few slides back. There are a few other grammatical uses of tone. For example, if we take the intransitive verb root ning to be ripe, then we can derive a deverbal adjective by adding on a nominalizing prefix to get ning, which means ripe. If I make a comparative adjective derivation, then I put on this general nominalizing suffix as well, ning ba, and we've got all mid-tones, and that means riper. To derive a superlative adjective, then I've got two options. The first option is that I add on this emphatic suffix. So, but this involves a sound change, a tone change. It comes out as ning tipa, which means ripest, or I can just leave out the emphatic there and say ning ba, which means ripest as well. So just like with the tone spreading of the agentive case marker, it seems like it's plausible to apply an autosegmental analysis to what's happening with the comparative derivation as well. Sorry, the superlative derivation. So here is our emphatic marker. That's got a floating high tone attached to it. So in the output, what happens is that that high tone docks onto the preceding syllable and it replaces the mid-tone. So the output is high tone on the root ning. And we see a similar thing going on with the second option. So once again, we've got a floating high tone, which is associated with the emphatic suffix, which carries its own mid-tone. And you can delete the mid-tone as well as the emphatic suffix, and that leaves that high tone floating. So again, it attaches to the root, to the preceding syllable, and it has a perseverative effect. It seems to spread to the nominalizing suffix as well, because that ends up being high as well. So it comes out as the ning ba. So maybe it's because it's emphatic that the high tone is also encoding that emphatic kind of a meaning. So there's a number of reasons why we can't ignore tone in these languages. We need to transcribe tone as well, because sometimes they do grammatical things as well as making lexical contrasts. I mentioned before that Warramong Mongsen has innovated a high central rounded vowel, and it's interesting that it's replacing some of the grammatical morphology. So for example, the causative, which comes from originally the word give, it's grammaticalized from the word to give. That has now become a high central rounded vowel for the causative, and we see the same change occurring with the irialis marker. We see it in the proximal demonstrative as well, and it sort of occurs sporadically in the alignment's not good here. It should be under Warramong, this one here, okay? So the first ones are from Mangmutung, and these ones here are under Warramong. You can see that it's sort of sporadic. It occurs in some lexical items, but not all of them, because down here I've got, again, a problem with alignment, sorry. So the first column is Mangmutung, and the second column is Warramong. And you can see that we've got E being retained here, not becoming U. I guess this is just taking some time to spread through the lexicon. I imagine it will eventually trigger changes in other lexical items as well. An interesting thing is how these Mongsen varieties have got creaky voice, which is phonemic, on just one articulatory position. I'm not sure why this is the case. Maybe it's easier to make creaky voice on a low vowel than it is on a high vowel. But we've got some examples here of words. Notice how we only get creaky voice occurring after a labial velar approximant, and I don't understand why that is the case either. It's fairly limited, but nevertheless, it occurs in enough words that I need to recognize it as being phonemic, because we get contrast between, for example, wang, right? Slice, and wang, go. So this is a minimal pair showing a contrast in meaning. So we have to recognize the phonemic status. And this is watsu, meaning bamboo water. I can play it for you.
画子，画子，
And you can see that there's very irregular peak-to-peak distances through the spectrogram, and that's the hallmark of creaky voice. And there's no glottal stop at the end of this, so it's not occurring. In fact, if I just talked about bamboo, then there would be a glottal stop on this, and we take off, so it's a compound, and that would have a glottal stop. But you can see that the glottal stop is not here in the spectrogram or in the waveform, but the creaky voice still is. So it's definitely phonemic. Let's look at voiceless sonorants now. And as I mentioned, these have merged in Zhongli and also in some bidialectal villages or formerly bidialectal villages like Warramong. It's common in that Ongbang range area of southern Mogokchung district. In these conservative varieties, such as Mangmutong, which is very similar to the Proto-Ao that Daniel Brun reconstructs in his thesis, each of the 3 voice nasals and the 4 voice approximants have got their voiceless counterparts. Now, they're not always truly voiceless. Sometimes they've got a breathy pronunciation. I'll show you and play some sounds for you to compare. They carry a fairly low functional load. The ratio is about 1 to 5 in an 800 item word list. They occur both initially and word medially, but they never occur word finally. And you can see that they occur in a fair range of different nouns and verbs as well. Sometimes they produce, at least for the rhotic here, this voiceless central approximant is slightly retroflexed. Sometimes it produces quite a lot of friction. I guess it's because the articulators become quite close together. You can see it here. It goes, this friction you see in the spectrogram goes up to about 8,000. And if I play it, you'll hear the friction as well. Okay, so quite a bit of friction there. Then if we go to a nasal now, a voiceless nasal, this will demonstrate how breathy it is. You can see that there's still voicing going through at the same time as we're getting this high frequency noise as well. I'll play this for you. So quite different in phonetic realization, but I think voicelessness pretty well characterizes them most clearly. Let's move on to Northern Sanctum now. This is a language I've been working on for probably since about 2012. It's spoken just on the east side of the Diku River, which pretty well follows this boundary between Mogokchung district and Tuensang district. It's in contact with a lot of different languages, with Chang to the north, Ao to the west, Sumi to the southeast, and Yimkyung to the, Sumi to the southwest and Yimkyung to the southeast. And here's a map just showing the villages. It's interesting because some of these villages have got bilingual populations, like Chare's got a Aoic and Sangsamong here, a Yim Kyung fellow who was giving me a lift back from Dunsang told me that Sangsamong has got a Jungkel as well. So there's quite a lot of language contact amongst these languages. In fact, Hutton in his tour diary thought that sanctum would disappear because it would be absorbed by other tribes. And I'll talk a little bit more about, this kind of thing a little bit later. So Northern Sanctum's got, again, the voiceless contrast. It's got some interesting sounds though. For a start, it's got this, retroflexed release, a rhotic release of a retroflex sound. And I've got a decent explanation for how that developed. It's also got quite a lot of fricatives. The F is in brackets here because labial dental fricatives are very rare overall. It's sort of marginal as a phoneme. But nevertheless, it is in contrasted distribution with the aspirated bilabial stop and the unaspirated stop. So, it's probably phonemic. Interestingly, though, it's got these bizarre sounds. And these top two are probably the rarest phoneme in the world. In fact, I think this is the only language in which they've been reported. Slightly more vowels. Again, we've got a triangular vowel system. And again, we've got 3 tones with an interesting complication, which I'll get to. This slide showing the phonotactics. Again, we've got simple onsets. Treating these retroflex with rhotic release as single consonants. I think they're just transphonemicized. I'll show you how. The coda consonants are fairly limited. We don't have any dentals that can occur in the coda position, and the rhotic here doesn't occur in any lexical items. It only occurs as a grammatical or in grammatical morphemes in a particular nominalizer. So that's interesting as well. It's very common. You hear it all the time, but that's because it's got a high functional load as a nominalizer. And I think that's all I need to say here. So I'll just go on to the next slide. And interesting thing is happening because the velar stop is realized as a velar stop when it's initial, but when it's a coda, it's realized as a glottal stop. And you can see that the constraints on what can be a coda is pretty high. It's down to mostly to velars, right? Velar nasal, velar stop. And we can see that the bilabials are becoming quite limited as well. They're only occurring after a particular vowel. Of course, they can all occur when there's no coda. And an interesting consequence is that the shift from a velar place of articulation to a laryngeal place of articulation has triggered a new tone. So we're looking at tonogenesis here. My assumption is that when you debuccalize and you change from a velar oral place of articulation to a laryngeal place of articulation, when you bring your vocal folds together to make a glottal stop, you put considerable pressure on the folds as a result of the vocalis muscle and the cricothyroid muscles contracting, and so that causes the pitch to go up. So as a result of this change from velar to laryngeal place of articulation, we've got a new tone which has developed. It looks like this. Okay, so here is our 3 tones. Again, they're fairly level. This one with the glottal stop, I guess what happens is after the muscles are relaxed, after the glottal closure is made, you get some relaxation, and that causes the pitch to go down as well. But it really doesn't sound like it's falling. It sounds like it's fairly level. And I guess that's because the first 100 milliseconds are the most important, and the pitch height at onset as well. So this is a new tone that's developed. What's happening though is that while you can still get glottal stops occurring word internally, unlike in Mongsen, quite often these glottal stops are disappearing as well. So you end up with a a high tone on a word that used to have a glottal stop but no longer has one, and that makes it difficult to distinguish between the original high tones and the high tone that's developed as a result of tonogenesis. Next thing is these correspondences with this Retroflex with its rhotic release. And Jim Matisoff has a good explanation for how this develops. If you look at the Proto-Tibeto-Burman words like grap here, well, what's happened is that there's been sort of a compromise between a velar place of articulation and the rhotic, and the compromise is a retroflex, but the rhotic pronunciation remains there as well. So it's sort of a neutralization that's occurred before a medial rhotic. And Jim notices that lots of languages have retroflexes in their transcriptions, and this explains why. So I just thought I'd play a sound for you that demonstrates it. You'll hear the rhotic release. Tra, tra, tra. So it's pretty clear, but it's not it doesn't sound like a cluster to me. It's too short to be a cluster. So it's one segment. There's been a trans phonologization, so it becomes just one contrastive sound, and then it fits with the phonotactics of the language as well, which only has a single consonant in the onset position. I did some static palatography with my long-suffering speakers because I wanted to see exactly how this sound is being made. And you can see here on this palatogram that there's no charcoal on the alveolar ridge here or in front of it. So he's obviously making a complete closure using a retroflex kind of active articulation. And my second speaker shows the same thing. There's his alveolar ridge there. You can see the charcoal at the gingiva next to the molar teeth and the premolars, but none behind his teeth here. And look, there's no charcoal on his tongue tip either. So he's obviously using the underside of his tongue tip in order to make that occlusion. And you can see the charcoal under his tongue here, but none on the top. So pretty clear that he's making a sublaminar active articulation. And this is a sound which has developed in the absence of contact with Indo-Aryan, because of course Indo-Aryan is known to have borrowed this sound from Dravidian originally, and then it's spread into certain Tibeto-Burman languages as well that are in contact. But here I think it's a result of that neutralization and the compromise between either a labial or a velar settling for a retroflex articulation with a rhotic release. All right, so the next unusual sounds are these pre-stopped bilabial trills, and these have got this two-way voice onset time contrast as well, unaspirated with aspirated, just like the other stops. Starts with either an apico or a laminodental occlusion, and it releases into a bilabial trill. Now, the strength and the duration of the trill varies according to the following vowel. If it's a high back-rounded vowel, then it's going to be longer, and that's because the lip attitude is conducive to making a trill sound. But it might come out just as a single tap, or it might be realized as a voiceless fricative, especially if it's aspirated. It could be voiced in an intervocalic environment, so the variations are quite significant. The interesting thing is that it's endangered. Younger speakers are getting rid of it, and they're shifting to a dental plosive for all of the words. And because I recorded a lot of speakers in Tronga village, and the old people were sitting and watching, and they were criticizing the younger speakers for not producing this free-stop bilabial trill. So it's interesting that it's being lost, and I don't know why. Here are some more spectrograms, palatograms and linguograms, and you can see that the occlusion is made completely with the tongue on the teeth, and then it's released into a trill, and it sounds just like this. this is the best example because I've got a high backgrounded vowel following the pre-stop bilabial trill. So you'll be able to see just down here you'll hear the oscillations of the lips.
Tsutura, tsutura, tsutura.
All right, that's the clearest example. When I compare this to, say, to the aspirated one, then it sounds like it's just a voiceless bilabial fricative. Sounds like this.
Liter, liter.
Okay, so no oscillation of the lips, no trilling. It is pretty common. It occurs in quite a few words. Like I got about 25 in my 700 item, 800 item word list that I first recorded. And then when I looked through a dictionary, I found even more. There's a local dictionary. It's not attributable to onomatopoeia, except for maybe this word, drum. But otherwise, you can see that we've got a range of different types of meanings associated with this sound. So we can't put it down to onomatopoeia. Here are some examples showing minimal pairs that it contrasts with the aspirated dental stop and the unaspirated dental stop. It's not so rare. So as I mentioned, I was a 900 item word list at over 24 examples. I found 150 headwords with the orthographic representation of this sound in this dictionary that was published in 2016 in Nagaland, and it occurs before all vowels, and it contrasts. It's definitely phonemic. And I've got a video here, which I'm not going to be able to play, but I'm going to, I think, Kartik, can I share my screen? I'll let you share your screen now, and you'll be able to play it from your end.
Yes, Alec, we are sharing our screen. Can you unshare your screen for a minute?
Sure. There we go.
Sure. Press. Can you hear us?
No.
Okay. Stop.
Shall we not worry, or do you want to try again?
No, we'll just try again. Once minute.
Okay.
Is it audible now?
No.
No, Karthik. Are you trying it as a separate tab?
Yes. I'm trying it as a separate tab. I'll just come to your place, Prosoma.
We did manage to play it before, so hopefully we can solve our little problem here. Otherwise, you can listen to it. I've provided a link in the
You
messages.
can hear it. We can hear it, right?
Ta,
Yeah.
ta, ta. Two.
We can't hear it, Kartik.
Fa. Seven. Fa. 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 Eight.
Did you hear anything?
Yeah, it's not so good. So let's not worry, and people can listen to it with good sound quality later on if they want to. and I'll continue on.
I'll have one final try because they figured out something here.
Okay.
One last try.
Fang, one.
மியூட் பண்ண வேண்டாம் அதனால கிளியர்
Tha, tha, tha. Two. Pa, pa, pa. Three. Pe, pe, pe. Four. Pang, pang, pang. Five. Pare, pare, pare. Six. Ba, ba, ba. Seven. Ba, ba, ba. Eight. Bang, bang, bang. Nine. Atta, atta, atta. 10. Atta, atta, atta.
Could you hear us, Alec?
Yes, thank you.
We'll stop our presentation now.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, I don't think we could see the transcription, which isn't quite correct. I need to go back and do the subtitles again because it's not phonetically correct. But nevertheless, he does an interesting thing. He sort of extends his lips a little bit as well when he makes these sounds. And you might have seen there's a little bit of oscillation of his lips in the lateral view. But it'll be much better if you play it yourselves using the Google link that's been provided. I'll have to stop that and move on. Okay, so the only other description of this particular sound is by Ladefoged and Everett. And they noted that it's a rare phoneme. It's only previously been, well, I noted that it's only previously been reported in Wari and Orowin, two Chapacuran languages of Brazil and Bolivia. And they described it as a voiceless apicodental plosive followed by a voiceless labial trill, which is how I would describe this sound of Northern Sanctum as well. They only found it in about 24 words. And they also noted that it was always released into a back-rounded vowel. And that makes me suspect that maybe it's not phonemic in this language. They said that there was no phonological reason to regard this as anything other than a single consonant. And I think that's true of Northern Sanctum as well. This is from the language that they recorded, Orowin, which has got this sound. I'll just play this for you.
Prom. Prom. Prom.
So it's similar to the relative example from Northern Sanctum, and you can see that there's some oscillation of the lips represented in the waveform here. Quite similar in many respects to the way that that word for relative was pronounced. Ladefoged and Madison in 1996 claimed that all bilabial trills historically developed from a sequence of a prenasalized bilabial stop followed by a relatively high back-rounded vowel, and that these segments remain prenasalized and contain a short oral stop phase, which is released into a trill. Does that explain the source of the pre-stop bilabial trill in Sanctum? Well, it's definitely an innovated phoneme. It's not attested in Yimkyung, in Lota, or any vowel varieties that I'm aware of. It's not restricted to back vowels though, so that strengthens the argument that it's phonemic. And I'm not convinced that it's originated uniquely from prenasalized stops, because we've only got a couple of reconstructible examples of this, like for example, the word for deaf from Proto-Tibeto-Burman, it's got a MB, M prefix and a B onset. Then similar for mother, we've got another possible nasal and a dental nasal following. But we've got, well, other words that are more problematic. We can see that they don't have nasals involved in them, and yet we've still got, for example, pre-stop bilabial trills in these words. So I'm not sure whether Ladefoged and Madison's proposal can account for all of them. And interestingly, some Changik languages of southwest Sichuan have bilabial trills, which are realized under certain circumstances. For example, after dental plosives, you get a bilabial trill. In Mianing Lizu, according to Yu 2012, who thinks it's related to the small aperture and the lip protrusion as well, associated with high back rounded vowels. So could it be that? It's a bit hard to say at this stage. I need to do some more work on this, and probably we need to do it soon because the speakers who've still got this phoneme in their inventories are passing away. It's mostly in people who are aged more than 65, even 40-year-olds, sometimes they don't have it. The other interesting sound is this labial coronal, doubly articulated sound, another one. Now this carries a very low functional load, but I find examples occurring in identical environments to the bilabial and dental nasals, so it's likely to be contrastive. It's only ever been reported in one other language of the world, and that's Yelet Nye, an isolate spoken on Rossel Island in Milne Bay Province, Papua New Guinea. This needs further investigation. There was one or two at the end of that video that I showed you, or Kartik showed us earlier. It occurs word initially as well as word medially. So I think it's phonemic as well. Now, sanctum is really undergoing a lot of change. We've got velar fricatives shifting to a laryngeal place of articulation. As I've mentioned, the pre-stop bilabial trill is shifting to a plain dental, the aspirated one to plain dental. And we've got a lot of words with a velar nasal causing a transphonologization, and that's resulting in phonemic nasalized vowels, after which the velar nasal gets lost from the end of the syllable. So we're going to end up with nasalized vowels in sanctum over probably in the near future. Maybe the next generation of speakers will have a full nasalized set as well. It seems to be more common for the back-rounded vowels, but I've also heard it in other vowels as well. And these changes occurring not just in rural areas and in the villages, but also in the cities as well. So my guess is that it's not a result of language change. It just seems to be an internal process that is carrying on. I mentioned that the pre-stop bilabial trill is endangered because the speakers who've got it in their phoneme inventories are passing away. If I'd started working on this language in another 30 years, maybe I wouldn't have known about this particular sound. So quite a lot of change going on. I've got just a little bit more to talk about just with Yim Kyung. They used to be known as Yim Chung. Recently, they changed their name to Yim Kyung. So I'm respecting their wish. This is a photo of Chesaw village that I walked to back in 2005. They're a really beautiful country. This is the Yim Kyung area down here in sort of overlapping with what's now the Noklak district as well, which is down this side. That was established just recently. And I mentioned before that Yim Kyung speakers, they're in contact with sanctum. They're also in contact with Kiamningan speakers as well, the Patso range variety in particular. A little bit in contact with Jung as well. And there's more contact down here in Kifre as well. This is fairly tentative. You can see that we've got, again, the voiceless contrast in the stops and the affricates. We've got the rhotic release to the Retroflex as well that we saw earlier in Northern Sanctum. We've got interesting velar approximant, which is phonemic. And we've got quite a lot of palatal consonants as well, which I guess has resulted from maybe high vowels causing these segments to become palatal. And again, fairly straightforward triangular vowel system, just 2 tones, high and low. And this is just showing the phonotactics. Again, we see that the onsets are simple. That glottal stop shouldn't be there. We should take that one out. Sorry about that. We've got just a couple of voiceless sonorants, the rhotic and the velar approximant. And I've got a fairly extensive word list, about 800 words for different speakers. So I guess that these are the only sonorants that are voiceless, no voiceless nasals. Nothing else really to say there. Less constraints on the coders. You can have dental coders in this language. This just demonstrates the velar approximant, and you can see that it is cognate with words in Mongsen which have got a labiovelar approximant. The only place where you get this is as a allophone before a high back rounded vowel, like in Wutno here. You can get glottal stops in the middle of words as well. They're not deleted before a morpheme boundary like Mongsen. And these are Yim-kyung tones. I'll just plug the work that my colleague and I, Damson Ningsang, have been doing. We've been running a dictionary workshop on this language, and we now have the prototype dictionary. It should be finished in another 1 or 2 years, I think. We also have a dictionary of Patso under development as well, and that explains my interest in lexicography and orthography as well, trying to get these languages in a written form so that we can extend the domains in which they can be used. Looking at the tones, these are pretty flat. You can see there's not a great deal of drop. So again, the fundamental frequency at the beginning of the rhyme is the main cue for identifying the pitch contrasts. And it's pretty straightforward because there's quite a big difference in hertz between the high and the low tone. So the tones are not so challenging, although you still got the intonation problem in this language. So lastly, Lota is spoken just to the south of the Ao area and in Walker district. And this has got, again, the voiceless contrast that we saw earlier in the plosives and the affricates. We've got quite a lot of voiceless sonorants in this language, except for I haven't heard this one. Maybe it'll come up. Maybe it's a result of defective sampling, but it's not in the word list that I've recorded so far. 3 tones, quite similar to what we've seen in Ao and Northern Sanctum, and again, a very basic triangular kind of a vowel phoneme system with a central vowel here, which probably corresponds with schwa in these other languages. And we've got this interesting doubly articulated labiodental stops here, stop fricatives. These always occur before a schwa, and so it's also another doubly articulated velar voiced labio dental occurring as a co-articulated sound, again occurring before schwa. We've got these harmonizing syllabic nasal prefixes and the voiceless sonorants that I mentioned before, quite extensive. The only one that's missing is the palatal approximant. And it looks like we've got a contrast between trills and this central retroflex approximant as well. And now I'm going to talk about word structure, and it's useful just to compare these Konyakian languages, Chang and Patso, because they're in contact with Yim-kyung and Sanctum, and you can see that there's been a bit of lexical replacement here, but generally in Mongsen Ao, you see that all of the kinship terms and body parts have got prefixes on them. I call these relational prefixes. If it's a body part or a kinship term or a non-relational prefix if it's occurring on things like artifacts, biosphere terms, etc. But buried inside are older prefixes which developed from this sesquisyllabic structure. So the m here, you can see m in Yimkyung, m with a slightly more back vowel in sanctum. And so what's happened is that this would have started off as being a sesquisyllable with m as a prefix, but the prefix ended up becoming fused to the root, and that allowed then a new sesquia minor syllable to attach to the front. So we can see diachronic layers of nominal prefixes in these Aoic languages, and the further we get across to the west, to the east, in contact with the Konyakian languages, the less frequently we see these because there's some lexical replacement. And Daniel Brun noted that there was about 400 cognates in the Aoic languages, but a lot less in Yimkyung and Sanctum because of lexical replacement. So of course, this creates more issues for trying to subgroup these languages as well. I'm just going to talk a little bit now before I finish about multilingualism, and starting with the Ao varieties. There's 90 Ao villages. 7 of these have got separate Mongsen and Chungli speaking wards, or what are called kells in Assamese and Nagamese. And then some Mongsen villages have got kells called the Chungli kel, even though everyone speaks Mongsen, like Kunsa and Warramong. So we must assume then that originally there were separate populations speaking different varieties of Ao. And then a little bit across the Diku River, over in the Sanctum area of Duansang, we find that Chare has got a Chungli kel as well, where people speak Ao as well as Northern Sanctum. And Chungli Yimti, which is the famous, the legendary ancestral village of the Ao, is now occupied by Sanctum speakers. Sengwok village down in Kifri district has got Southern Sanctum as well as Yimkyung populations as well in their midst. Jakba village, which is on that Lampangkong range, just on the right bank of the Diku River, has got separate Chungli Ao and Chung speaking kells. People speak their own language in like church meetings, and everyone can understand regardless of what their native language is. Noxon and Litum, I mentioned before, they used to be Ao villages. Now they're Chung villages, but they've still got communities who can speak Ao. And Yaung Yimti, which is a little bit north of Chakpa, again on that western bank of the Diku River, has got Chungli, Pom, and Chung-speaking populations. Some Kiamningan villages of extreme eastern Nagaland have got Tikir-speaking kells in their midst as well. Wee village looks like it speaks some variety of Yimkyung as well, even though they dress like Batso Kiamningan people. So the question is, how did all this diversity come about? Well, I think we need to consider language contact and convergence, and how did it develop? Well, I've got documented textual evidence from a narrative about how the Chung used to kidnap women from the Ao. Now, those women would have ended up becoming the wives of men, and because they were born into patrilineal Chung clans, then the children would have had to speak Chung, but probably their mothers spoke to their children on their mother's knees in their mother tongue, which was Ao or perhaps other languages that they were, tribes that they were kidnapped from. We know that this area had a lot of intra-village conflicts. Sometimes clans would move from one village to another village because it was in dispute with another clan. And we also know that famine was common in the past. So one clan might shift to another village because there was more land to farm, and there was more chance of surviving. We know also that more powerful troops raided weaker tribes, and eventually they annexed them and also their lands in toto. And we know that Nagaland lies in a biological hotspot, and wherever you get extreme biological diversity, you also find extreme linguistic diversity. We see this in Papua New Guinea, we see it in West Africa, and we see it in Northeast India as well. And I think also that these mountains of this Indo-Burmese arc probably were like a refuge zone. And I'm influenced by Scott's book, The Art of Not Being Governed here, because these militarized paddy states that developed in the lowlands in Myanmar, and I think the people of Nagaland probably passed through, at least the central and southern Nagaland people passed through Myanmar on the way into the mountains. They may have been fleeing from these militarized paddy states that were trying to press them into corvée laborer to grow rice so that they could then tax the produce of the serf laborers, and then that would support their armies and they would expand their territory and capture more people and bring them back, because the war booty was people. They were the ones who were brought back, not necessarily wealth. So perhaps this area served as a refuge zone. Once people had gone up into the mountains, it was economically not viable to pursue them by these the armies of these lowland militarized states. So the people were able to live up there in independence. This is just an excerpt from Mills, who commented that Naga invaders do not, as a rule, obliterate their foes, more usually after reducing the village, which is their objective, to a suitable frame of mind by repeated raids. They come and live in it as overlords, take wives from it, and gradually absorb it into their own community, even if the greater part of the invaded village does retreat out of range, as sometimes happens. Some are almost sure either to remain or to creep back into an existence inglorious but secure. So it's been documented as well that this kind of raiding and taking of land, I think we've seen pulses of people moving across from the east, forcing those who are not able to hang on to their land further over. Mills commented that the owls would have ended up down on the Assam plain if the British had not annexed their land when they arrived, because the tribes that were behind, the Chung in particular, were more powerful and they were taking their land. And we see that areas, villages named by one tribe are no longer occupied by that tribe as well. We see this in the Sumi area. So I think that's probably where I should stop. I'd just like to acknowledge the Singapore government for the grants that it's offered me to allow me to do my research, and in particular the Sanctum community. Mr. Manan Sanctum and Reverend Tridong have been very helpful to me. And also I thank Dr. S.J. Akam in Shamator and the Yimkyung dictionary team for help with work on Yimkyung. I'll just show you my references, so you've got a record of those, and I'll stop there. I'll stop sharing. Maybe, should I stop sharing my screen or should I leave it open?
You can leave it open in case, because it's phonology, maybe someone wants to revisit it. Thank you very much, Aoic, for your fantastic talk.
Thank you.
Providing a panoramic view of the phonological diversity of Aoic languages of Nagaland. You kept us engaged for an hour and a half, but we gained a lot of interesting insights on the grammatical uses of the tone, especially creaky voice phonation, voiceless sonorants, tonogenesis from a variety of languages you have worked on. Some of us were really, what should I say, like overwhelmed with the kind of examples you provided and took us into a journey of Mongsanao, Chungliao, Northern Sanctum, Yimchon, and of course, also touched upon Lotha. I'm sure there are plenty of questions, so I do not want to summarize your talk here. I also found your audio and video files very supporting that demonstrated your claims. Now we open the talk for discussions. Audience, please feel free to interact with Aoic. You can ask him questions directly, or you can also put in your comments and observations or queries in the chat box.
The only problem is I can't see. Is there any way I can reduce my, so I can go back?
Or you can stop sharing for a while, and in case you need to go back, you can share.
Okay, yeah, that would be good. Okay.
Any questions, comments, please? Yes, Yansu Beni.
Actually, Sarah, I appreciate you for bringing out a lot of phonology, and there are no much things that I have to say, but I could see that some of the datas, I'm not sure which variety you might have taken, but I could see that some of the datas, like the one in some initial observations in Lota language, the word for shoulder, it's supposed to be a v.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, and the word for wind, it's supposed to be mbung instead of mbang. And there is one word structure that in Lota, that father, the word for father, it's apo. So I was wondering which variety this one is, but
Okay, I wish I had my notebook here. I'm in my office and I've got my notebooks at home because I've been working at
yeah,
home. But I'm
yeah,
pretty sure it's Illumio variety.
Elmio. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
think I recorded the data in 2008, so it was
Okay,
a long time
2008.
ago. And then I
Oh,
got
okay.
involved with other languages, and I
Okay,
haven't
sir.
gone back to it for a while. So
Okay,
there
sir.
might be some, there could be some differences. I'm not sure how many varieties there are
Yeah.
of Lota. In fact, every village might have a different variety. That's the case that I find on the other languages that I work on. There can be substantial differences from village variety to village variety.
Yeah, that is true, sir. I'm also a native speaker of Lota, and I have heard varieties of Lota spoken by people from other villages, but I have never come across this word shoulder. So maybe I could just with a native speaker from LMU, I could I could go and confirm from them also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm quite happy to acknowledge that my work on Lota is
Yeah.
very rudimentary at this stage and tentative. So
Yes, I understand. I
yeah,
really appreciate you, sir, for taking up this word.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Yes, David Bradley has a question.
Yes, David. Oh, I have to open queue. Okay.
David, are you there? Can we see you? Alec, can you see him?
No, I can't see him.
But he has raised his hand.
Does he need to be given permission to speak? Is that the issue?
Not necessary, because Yansu Beni spoke just now.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, till let him come back. Before that, we can take questions from others. Anyone else?
Can I have a general inquiry into this? Alex, may I?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I'm really thrilled with this whole idea of you being there and taking data and all, because I spent 8 years in Kohima myself. We started the Department of Linguistics where you taught later. Actually, we began in Kohima. And one of the endeavors that we had gone into was, all the 17 language officers and assistants from the education department, they used to come to our department and they would sit down, and each one in turn for a week or so would sit down and bring their lists of words. And so one got sort of exposed to those 17 languages during that tenure, and we left behind some data banks for the department as well.
Yes.
And one thing, I mean, since you also inquire into the nature of language in general, the idea of social linguistic variation in these languages, I mean, of course, the fact that different villages are so different from each other is there. Does that mean geographical dialects are always much more real than, say, social? There's nothing like social dialects are a construct, not so much of the tribal society as such. I mean, unless, of course, you have clan-based thing or age-based criteria. But otherwise, there is relatively some sort of a homogeneity in all that. I mean, would you say that? I mean, typically in those class terms or education terms, are those affecting the native language at all?
Yeah, I think, it's a good question. I think it's based on whether the language is codified or not. Like, I suppose the Chungli is more codified than others, but even then you find huge variety. And Timson Nungsang tells me that, for example, speakers who live on the Chunky Kong range, who speak the language that Clark, the missionary, developed the dictionary of Ao on, and the orthography, isn't necessarily understood by somebody who lives on that Lampang Kong range. So it's only standardization which allows us to say that there's a homogeneous type of a language. And my experience is that in these tribal societies, there's a huge amount of variation. It varies from village to village. And really good speakers can tell you what village people come from by the way that you speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like I speak Mangmutung I speak Mongsen with a Mangmutung accent. They tell me that. So I've picked up those particular shibboleths that allow them to identify where I learned Mongsen. Yeah.
So the good old dialect geography has great deal of meaning. The entire Tangkhul area, I mean, there is a family of languages awaits to be talked about and all that. But, you also were interested in orthography and things like that, and you use the word standardization. I'm a little wary of using words like standard in Northeast context because it's a sort of an imported construct of sorts. They talk of common language,
Yeah.
They don't prefer to talk of standard because standard brings in a notion of class or hierarchy, which is subversive in some sense. So they would rather use something like solidarity type of common language. And even when they are so much into this Chungli and they don't like the idea of Mungsen being used into the education, all this resistance towards that. You must have stayed there, and since you're a linguist and you have no such sort of notions about one thing is superior to the other, and you would be equally happy to have written samples from Mungsen and all that. But what is the kind of feeling you get? Are people willing to use Mungsen in literacy endeavor? Are they willing to take it into the domain of education? Would they like to diversify our content in schooling and all that? There's a larger question on planning and thinking together on taking the language forward.
Yes. Just to comment on your first thing, I think when you write an orthography for a language, you're making a decision, and like it or not, that language ends up becoming the prestige. So usually it's by chance, right? Clark was able to go up into the mountains and not lose his head, so he ended up going to this village where he already had contacts. But it wasn't necessarily the best language to choose.
Agree.
Yeah. So it has vast ramifications when you choose to write a particular language, because that language ends up becoming the common language, or the standard, if you like. But we have to write these languages, because if they don't have writing systems, they're going to disappear. And so this is why Damso and I've been working on creating orthographies and dictionaries recently, and I hope to continue this work, because that's more than anything else. It's also going to empower the people. Now I've forgotten the second thing that you wanted to ask me about.
About I think I was talking about the variation. The idea is that it's sort of another social lex of the kind, socially based differentiation of any kind, or in these languages that you notice.
No, I don't think so. I think each
geographical reality is the most basic and primordial.
Yeah, each language, the status of each language seems to be equal, and but then maybe people do tend to come up with some sort of a common language. And Dimson and I thought that it would be, well, firstly, we were contacted by a friend in the Patso Kiamningan community to help with a dictionary. And so that's what started the dictionary project with the Kiamningan people. Then we were contacted by another friend, old friend from my 2005 walk, and he asked me if I could help create a Yimkyung dictionary. And so when you've got the people themselves who have got a desire, then it's really good. Then we can create workshops and we can get the work done. But we told the Mongsen people of Kansa that we would like to create a dictionary for their language, and that hasn't been successful. And I think part of the reason is because there is this reluctance
Resistance.
by the community not to have Mongsen as a written language. Yeah. So what you're saying is important. There's, you know, there's, I don't want to create any problems in the community.
So also, I mean, we had that entire issue. I mean, I remember this, you know, we had a meeting of all the language officers of all different language backgrounds sitting with the Department of Education. And we were making the same linguistic point of all languages being equal, but they have their own take on it. And of course, beyond a point, it's their issue. So one can't go and interfere and change that mindset. But you know what? It may have been 20 years back, 30 years back, the idea of a common language may have been their most important issue. But having taken it after 30 years, now they may want to diversify the content. We could wait for that possibility, right? And have literacy materials ready in Mongsen and Junki and other, so that as and when they feel like, you know, so that's, I'm also asking now, social media, for instance, is a new thing, a new domain that has opened up all new possibilities. And people may be writing their language, you know, naturally in some sense, just as they speak their natural on the mobiles. So I'm wondering whether you have come across samples of the Mungsens and other being written in the entire environment as it's happening in the digital world today. There are changes that are happening in the ecology of the use of language already. The domains are, new domains are appearing that we had not thought of some time back.
Well, you know, it's because it's not standardized, it's very variable how people represent the language. But Tamsa and I have developed phone apps for Batso Kiamningan and Yimkyung as well. And when the communities and we are happy with the number of words we've collected and we've got example sentences for every head word, then we'll release the dictionary apps into the community, and they can just be spread through the community via Bluetooth. So it's an ideal way of getting people interested and aware of how to write their languages. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, sure.
Just to get back to your point about a common language, isn't this what the Tenyidie speakers have done?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
they're quite successful, right?
Yeah, you know, in the census returns, they suddenly, there was this very crazy returns in the census. People started returning Sumi instead of Sema. And the census people were at a loss. They thought it was a new language that has cropped up and they did not even register it. So they called it another language, you know, actually. I mean, so similarly, but Tenyidie, when they started, the Angami people started returning Tenyidie as their mother tongue. By that time, the census department was made aware by some of us that this is happening in Nagaland. There's this identity thing, and people like Sharozale and others, and all these people are interested in creating this common language across these, so which is the Tenye May people and all that. So they were aware of that, and so when they returned Tenye, they put it under Angami. They didn't call it a separate language.
Yes.
Okay, because Angami was long-term returns in census they were appearing, so they called it a mother tongue under Angami. But Sumi, they were not aware of the situation, so they just left it unclassified, and poor Semas lost their numbers in the process.
Anyway, thank you, Rajesh. So we have some more questions. David Bradley, is David there? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here now. I had my
now we can see. First of all, it's indeed a great honor to have you with us today. Thank you so much for sparing your time to be with us.
Thank you, and I'd like to congratulate Aoic on this wonderful talk. It's really great to see all this data. A couple of comments. One, if we look at the Lota labiodental affricates, you notice that Lota is also geographically adjacent to Angami or Tenyidie, whichever we use. And so this could all be an aerial phenomenon. Another thing, your bilabial, I should say, alveolar plus bilabial voiceless trill affricate. This is something which is an aerial phenomenon, not just in some Changik languages, but also in Chinese, as spoken in southwestern Sichuan, and in Nosu, as spoken in the same area in southwestern Sichuan, where you have a bilabial trill, which is the allophone of a high back-rounded vowel that occurs after not just an alveolar stop, but also after bilabial and velar stops,
Mm.
Nosu and Namuyi and many other languages. So that's really quite interesting. And again, to look at the diachronic perspective, I guess, I'm sorry, there isn't really a question here, but just the comment on the vigesimal counting system, counting by 20s. This is quite widespread in many Tibeto-Burman languages, with the cognate form something like what you have in the Aoic languages, the kul form, or kul, I should probably say, unaspirated, depending on which variety of Aoic you're speaking. But the overcounting phenomenon is unusual. Usually we get undercounting. So like 1 before 20, 2 before 20, before 19 and 18. So this is something which I think we could definitely say is not aerial, but probably genetic to this particular subgroup. So thank you very much for an excellent talk. As I say, don't really have a question here, but perhaps we can discuss this by email.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'd be interested to read some papers on Nosur and these other languages of Southwest Sichuan if you have any references for me. There is, that language Yakcham Tengsa, which was noted by Mills to be of uncertain affiliation. The Ao wouldn't accept these people as kinsmen, and neither would the Pom. They adopted a vigesimal system. They were the only Ao dialect back in 1926 that had a vigesimal system, and the word for 20 was the word for body, which, as Mills points out, has got 10 fingers, and I won't hold up my 10 toes. So they use the word tamang, body, for 20, which is interesting as well.
Thank you for that. We have 2 more questions. I see 2 more hands. Temsu first, followed by Ching, who will speak through Manohar's.
Yeah, thank you, Alec, for the talk. I think, plenty to take away from the talk as usual. I just had this small question on the trill. Is this is it in the orthography of sanctum? Do they distinguish these this contrast?
Yeah, they write it as TP, but sometimes they write it as TB as well. So there's a bit of variation. This is how I got onto this, because there was a paper written, it was published in 1939 by a German guy, and he had examples of TP in his transcriptions. And then once I recorded a word list, I started to see what I could find out about this unusual sound, and I came across his paper. So yeah, they do write it in the orthography as TP or TB or something like that. Sometimes they represent it with no, I think that's it. I think that just TB or TP.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ching, can you please ask your questions? Ching is a Tedimchin speaker.
I have already typed my questions in the chat box in YouTube, but since I get the opportunity to interact with you personally here, so I'll repeat the same thing again. First of all, thanks for the enriching talk that you have given. So I have learned a lot from that. And my first observation is, it is interesting to note that sanctum has voiceless velar fricative and voiceless aspirated velar plosive as separate phonemes, which rarely occurs as phonemes in other languages, including the Kukichin languages. It is either the occurrence of the voiceless velar fricative or voiceless aspirated velar plosive in the consonant phonemes in many of the languages. So it is quite interesting to come upon these 2 sounds occurring together as separate phonemes in sanctum. And the other thing is, have you come across other grammatical functions of tone in Naga languages or in some other Tibeto-Burman languages apart from derivation, which you had discussed in your talk? Because I'm also a tonal speaker and my language has grammatical function of tones. So our tones mostly function as a genitive marker. For example, to change, to mark the position of something, for example, my dog or somebody's dog. So in that we use tone as a genitive marker. And the other thing is we also use tone to change the grammatical category. For example, noun to verb or noun to some other grammatical category. So in your work in Naga languages or in any Tibeto-Burman languages, have you come across any other function of tone apart from derivation? So thank you.
Okay, that's very interesting that you get it for marking genitive as well as for derivation. No, it's very limited. So far, I haven't found it apart from what I shared with you in Mongsen, and I haven't come across this in Sanctum yet, but I haven't done a lot of work with texts, so I'm not sure at this stage. Mostly I've been focusing on just the phonology. You don't really come across this until you start working deeply with texts and you start to make connections with the speaker. No derivation of verbs from nouns, for example, in any of the languages. And I'm not sure how widespread this is. You know, it's really, really common in African languages, and that creates a problem when an Africanist reads a review or does a review of a paper that a Southeast Asianist has written, because I remember Stephen Maury and I discussing this. We contributed to a 2014 volume in language conservation and documentation, and there were Africanists involved in this special issue on tone, and they were complaining about us not separating out nouns from verbs and things like that, because of course in African languages it's tone that determines these differences. It's got a grammatical function, not a lexical function. So it just goes to show that African languages are very different from Southeast Asian languages, because the use of tone is mostly lexical. Nevertheless, it seems that there are some limited uses of tone for grammatical reasons, and you've given some examples here. So nothing beyond what I've already talked about today, but I will comment that the converb clauses, particularly the sequential converb clauses, which end in have got a particular intonation which marks them, and I think it distinguishes them from the present tense marker, which is as well, but with a low tone. So I think what's happened is that the present tense marker has grammaticalized from a agentive nominalizer. So the sequential converb has also grammaticalized from the agentive nominalizer. So if you see the same form, ER, on the end of a clause, is it marking present tense or is it marking a sequential converb? Well, I think it's the intonation that tells you whether it's marking a non-final converb clause or whether it's marking present tense. So intonation has developed almost a grammatical kind of a function in these languages, but nothing more than that that I'm aware of. But thank you anyway for sharing that with me.
Thank you. Like, are there any other questions from the audience? I see two more hands raised, or they are on the same old hands. Benny and Temsu, unless you have new questions or you forgot to unraise your hands. Anybody else? If not, I have a couple of questions, Alec, but I have several, but because due to lack of time, I'm just going to limit myself only to two questions. Number one, I was very much interested in seeing that you are also going to focus the next few years on orthography development as well, because now you have a good grip over the phonology of the Aoic languages. I'm sure you are going to take up more research. I'm just curious, does Yimching have any standard orthography? Yimchung.
Yes, well, it did have one, but there were a number of problems in it. So in 2019, Tamsa and I went to Shamator and we worked with the Baptist Church organization, who were connected with the person who was a guide for me when I went walking through their villages, through their mountains back in 2005. So they expressed a wish to develop a dictionary, and so that was the one that you were going to come to, but you were unable to attend. Well, we showed them the problems with the orthography as it was, and we introduced marking tone as well, because there's a lot, like in all of these languages, there's quite a lot of homophones, and by marking tone, you speed up reading speed, and you aid comprehension. But then, of course, the speakers have got to be able to get to the point where they can recognize tones. So we've now slightly modified the original orthography that they had. I've been using a program with Temsa called We Say, and the Yim Kyung community have got copies of We Say in their computers, and they're uploading data to the program, which then they save to a server in Thailand, and we can download it to our computers, make changes and upload our changes to the server in Thailand, and they can download, and we keep going like this, you see. So we're trying to get to 10,000 words. We've got about 6,000 at the moment, and it's based on our new orthography, which has got tone marking as well. And we're doing the same with the Batso Kiamningan community as well. We ran a workshop there in 2017, and then we did another one in 2019, and they're going really, really well. So what I would like to do now, see, Philip, I've made my career out of working on these languages, and these people have helped me to build my career in academia. I feel I have to give something back to them now.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I'm in a position where I've got tenure. Now I can focus on giving back to the communities. So I think the main contribution I can make is to give them orthographies that are useful. And I'm also developing storybooks as well, illustrated storybooks written in English and in the vernacular language, beautifully illustrated by our art students here. I run these as research projects for undergraduates, and we'll publish these books as well. And that will be a way of introducing the writing systems to the younger speakers, because they're the ones who count, right? We want the people who are aged, say, 4 to 10 to get used to the orthography and to start reading and writing in their own language. And then the dictionary apps as well will be another way. We're trying to create new domains for the language to be used, and that's going to protect them against becoming endangered in the future.
Yeah. I'm very happy to hear that. Of course, I missed the opportunity to visit you and the Yimchung team 2 years back. Now we will take it up again. I'm sure we'll be able to do more work on that. But I'm very happy that, like, you're interested in giving back to the community, especially starting with orthography development. And it will take us into more other revitalization efforts. My second question is related directly to your talk. So that's the only question I'm asking, because we are already getting late. So we're running out of time. You mentioned about the glottal stop in Mongsan and Chungli, and you said that in the final position, they are obligatory deleted, especially when they occur before a syllable or a morphemic boundary. I think I missed, maybe you said it and I missed, but I just want to clarify whether is that the same case with Yimchung and Lotha as well? Because you did have glottal stops. Are they phonemic, and what is happening with the glottal stop in Yimchung and Lotha?
Yes. No, in Yimkyung, you can have a glottal stop word internally. And you can also have a glottal stop word internally in sanctum. And I believe with lota as well. It's only with the Ao dialects, it seems, that you get this deletion of a glottal stop before a morpheme or a syllable boundary. So that's why I'm sort of reluctant to call it a fully fledged phoneme, because you wouldn't expect a phoneme to get deleted before a morpheme boundary. And of course, you get sometimes you get syllables which have got glottal stops. You take away the glottal stop and you lose the creaky voice on the vowel as well, because it's part of the representation of the glottal stop. But then you've got other examples like the minimal pair I gave you, the word for slice, which is wa. But if you put a imperative onto that root, then the glottal stop gets lost, but the creakiness stays there. So it seems to me that the creaky voice is independent of the glottal stop in some, but not all words. Definitely, you never get any word internal glottal stops in Mongsen. And I think that's the case also in Zhongli. The other languages seem to allow internal glottal stops.
Interesting. Yes. So one last thing, but you don't have to answer right away, because you've raised an important issue of also saying that sounds are also becoming endangered. Like you give the example of pre-stop bilabial trills. And so what we linguists, what shall we do about it? You don't have to answer it right now. I mean, this is also something you have opened up. So I think, like you already said, you're bringing out storybooks, illustrated storybooks. Maybe you're also writing primers and trying to help the community to revive their languages. I was just wondering whether we could also help them to maintain their sounds. I do not know whether I am right, but I just thought like it's also part of our duty, so that the sounds are also intergenerationally transmitted, if I may say so.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether we can do that though, because languages change, and that's just the nature of language. They're dynamic things, aren't they? And I guess the pre-stop bilabial trills will get lost from sanctum if this younger generation is not producing them. But we can just document them, because we need to document some things we do for communities, some things we do for our discipline, and for phonological typology, we need to document all of the great diversity of human languages. And if we can get to it before it disappears, then that's good. But of course, this has been happening for probably the last 180,000 years that Homo sapiens have been speaking languages. They've changed, they've lost sounds, they've died out, and so on. I think we just need to document them, at least for
yes, I understand. Yeah. Thank you so much for your answers. If there are no other questions, we would like to say thanks to Aoic. Are there any questions? Anybody? Shailendra, do you want to say something?
Yes, I am there. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Alexa, how are you?
Very
I don't
well,
have any particular question as such, but it was a very interesting talk that you gave about the phonological understanding, especially of tones and their relationship. So thank you very much for giving such a wonderful talk. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening.
Aoic, sorry, go ahead.
After you.
Yes.
Can I say something? Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. And you have been working so hard on these languages for about 20 years, maybe now?
Yeah, longer. I started in 95.
95, wow, 26 years. Wow, okay. So you have immersed yourself into these languages, and it's a very impressive talk. The kind of work that you are doing would be of great help to people like me who have been trying to work on typology, something on Tibeto-Burman too. Okay, so maybe I'll be in touch with you when I need some help, especially with some syntax.
Most welcome. I'm sure I can get some help from you with syntax as well.
So let's help each other. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And hope to see you in person sometime.
Yes. Stay
things
well.
go well. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Alec. You have been always kind to us. Anytime we approach you, you have been with us in the institute, whether it is CIL or NEHU, you have never said no. You were. I recall the moments we had with you in Sala conference here, though I was not officially working in CIL at that time. So I take this opportunity to formally thank Professor Alexander Robertson Coupe for his excellent talk. Thank you so much. I think this is going to be a wonderful journey for many of us who are also going to work on many aspects of Northeast languages, especially orthography development. CIL has taken up a project with Northeastern Council. This is a project given to us by the Ministry of Northeastern Region. So we are working on Lingam currently, and we are also exploring to work on other languages. Maybe we will get in touch with you. Some of my colleagues and I, like Lavendra Brahma, Sujay Sarkar, and myself, are involved in this. So it's going to be very useful to be in touch with you more and more, and let us work together. Thank you once again for keeping all of us for 2 full hours engaged. I mean, we were not, to be honest with you, it was a wonderful 2 hours, completely engaged, listening to the beauty of the languages of Nagaland.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Let me add, engrossed also. We were totally engrossed and immersed like in his
Exactly.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. It was almost like listening to you in person.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, for being with us. Each and everyone who are present here deserve really our gratefulness for being very much involved in the discussions, for making this an interactive and stimulating meeting. Thank you, one and all. Thanks, Alec. So
Thank you. Thank you for your questions and comments and for listening.
Lovely. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Namaskar.
Namaskar. Bye.